Recall that a few years back I coined this phrase. I think I coined it. I may well have borrowed it from somebody else without realizing it, but of referring to people as morbidly rich. People who are, well, morbidly rich. And now there's another phrase out there that I think is just absolutely brilliant. There's an organization, a new institution called the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute. The Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute, excessivewealth.org is their website. EWDi Institute is their Twitter handle. And their executive director is Gabriela Sandoval, PhD, whose Twitter handle is G Sandoval, PhD, by the way. And Gabriela is on the line with us right now. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you today.
Thank you for joining us. I think what you're doing is just great. Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, EWDi has been in the making for several years, but I just came on board a month ago. Friday was my 1-month anniversary. And we are, really in earnest launching this effort with 3 main goals in mind in the short term. So we are looking at changing the cultural debate around morbid wealth, as you just phrased it, or people who are morbidly rich or excessive wealth, as we are saying. So to that end, we're conducting research and amplifying existing research in this space. We are also working with allies, right? So we see excessive wealth and the excessive wealth disorder created by that concentration of wealth as impacting everything from racial justice, gender justice, the just transition to green energy, climate justice, homelessness, you name it. And so we really are working to amplify the voices of other organizations that are impacted by this disorder. And then we're working directly with high net worth individuals to generate support for taxing the ultra rich and other related policy solutions.
I've often speculated out loud and sometimes in writing that it appears to me that many, not all obviously, but many of these people who are morbidly rich are actually suffering from an identifiable and actually fairly commonly well-known mental illness. It's a variation on obsessive compulsive disorder. It's referred to as hoarding syndrome. And yes, had they not been born into wealthy families, by and large, or not had an opportunity to get insanely rich. But typically, I mean, even Bill Gates' dad was on this program about a decade ago talking about how, he gave his son every advantage, and had he not been able to do that, there's no way that Bill Gates would have become Bill Gates. That had they not been born into those families, they'd be the guys you see on TV who live in a house where the newspapers are all the way up to the ceiling and you got to thread through the, between the tin cans and things to get through the living room. But because they have a lot of money, instead of hoarding tin cans and newspapers, they're hoarding money. And I'm wondering, what you think of that.
I am in full agreement with you. I think the disorder part of our name as an organization references exactly that, the impact, the disordered kind of behavior of the ultra rich who really, even in multiple lifetimes, couldn't spend the amount of wealth that they are sitting on. And then also references the other, the societal disorders that could really be resolved if we address the high concentration of wealth among really 150,000 individuals in this country.
Yeah, and not just the money that they're sitting on, their constant drive to get more. I know an individual with hoarding syndrome, literally, who had to buy a second house because their first house was so full of stuff, and they were not able, literally not mentally able to let go of it or throw it in the trash or anything. This was not, a particularly wealthy family either, sadly. So what do we do? How do we work to get this into, putting on my psychotherapist hat here, how do we get this into the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association? I think it should be in there. Hoarding syndrome was put in there in the last 2 decades, I believe.
Yeah, well, okay, so you might have to bring on someone else from another organization whose focus is there, but what I can tell you is that for us, it's really imperative that we use our existing tax policies to address the problem, that we enact new, better tax policies to address the problem, and that we allow the IRS to have the resources that they need in order to enforce tax policies and close loopholes.
Right. Although, obsessive compulsive behavior can be minimized with fluoxetine and other, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. I mean, if maybe we could, mandate that anybody who has more than $1 billion in the bank has to go on Prozac for a year and recover their sanity. I don't know. Obviously some of this is tongue in cheek, but this is a very real issue and a very real problem, and it is literally causing death. And not just problems in America, but people dying as a result of poverty and homelessness and lack of access to health care. The health care that should be available, that is available to every citizen of every developed country in the world except the United States. And the only reason it's not available here in the United States is because we've got a handful of morbidly rich people who pay off politicians and who paid off other politicians to get their people on the Supreme Court, who they also pay off to legalize political bribery. And
exactly.
So, what are the action steps? I applaud your let's do something about taxes. But what are the action steps people can take? Where the research? You said you're doing research. You're aligning with other organizations. What marching orders have you for the rest of us out here?
Well, we are anticipating, for example, the reintroduction of the Oligarch Act. We are, I think we're at a really critical moment in our history, because let's say 5 years ago, we probably couldn't have been talking about this, right? We couldn't have been talking about holding the ultra rich accountable and making sure that they pay what they owe. If school teachers and firefighters and just everyday people can be forced to pay what they owe in taxes and held accountable through IRS action, then we should be able to hold the ultra rich accountable in that way too. And so I think for now, I would encourage folks, as you did at the top of your program or top of this segment, to follow us on social media. We will be engaging in policy and legislative advocacy once we really get the momentum going in that sense. And we will be flagging opportunities for people to get involved.
We are speaking with Dr. Gabriela Sandoval, the Executive Director of the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute. The website is excessivewealth.org. Great URL, by the way. EWDi Institute on Twitter, and G. Sandoval, PhD, on Twitter. Gabriela, I understand that student loan forgiveness is within your portfolio, and I'm wondering your thoughts on what we saw in the Supreme Court yesterday.
Sure. So let me just start by saying that this is an issue that's near and dear to my own experience. I was a first-generation university student, child of immigrants, born and raised in this country. And when I left Cornell University, PhD in hand, I also had a significant amount of educational debt in hand. I paid that debt for 10 years and paid back every dollar that I borrowed originally. I paid another 5 years, so ended up paying back 150% of what I originally borrowed.
Wow.
And recently, through Biden's waiver for public service loan forgiveness, had more than half of what I borrowed forgiven. So think about that. After almost 20 years of paying on my student loans, I had more than half of my debt canceled through public service loan forgiveness.
That's
and
great.
So I'm very much a proponent of Biden's plan. Biden's plan is incredibly modest when you think about it. And I think, the folks who, I'll just say it, the Republicans who are fighting against this are in all actuality being myopic, because when you think about the amount of money that is borrowed for education in this country, right? The average university graduate comes out with about $37,500 worth of debt. That is the equivalent of $150,000 lost in lifetime wealth. And this is a key aspect of wealth inequality, right? What ultimately exacerbates this divide between the ultra wealthy and the wealthy, and those of us who are just trying to provide opportunity for our children, our grandchildren, et cetera. So if you have two young people who've graduated from college, they've gotten married, started a family, that's on average, $300,000 of wealth lost over their lifetime, of money that could be spent in their states, that could go into the economy, that could help their parents, retire with dignity, that could help their children go to school themselves debt-free. I mean, it's just, it really is truly a travesty that this is being contested the way that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Gabriela Sandoval, PhD, the executive director of the Excessive Wealth Disorder Institute. Excessivewealth.org is the website. Get over there and sign up for it. EWDi Institute on Twitter. Gabriela, thank you so much for dropping by. It's great meeting you.
Thank you, Thom.
Thank you.